Welcome back, everyone, to History of the Gold Standard. I think this is part 4 now. Let's see. The first one, we did the Peel Act in Britain in 1847. Second one, we took us to 1871, right after the Civil War. And then we went to 1913 in the last video, which is on the verge of World War I. Now, all three of those videos will be tied to a playlist up here. And this video as well will be part of the playlist. So you can find everything as we head into the 1900s. So now, timeline again. Sorry about the glare, doing the best I can with the lighting. Timeline. There we go. So we are going to go from 1913 to 1944. Okay. That's essentially the end of World War II, but there's also a good big, most of you probably know Bretton Woods. That's going to be our major event. Okay. Bretton Woods. So that's where we're going to end. So 1913, Federal Reserve. We got the Fed. We got the IRS. And we've got the birth of the dollar in that present form, which probably, I guess it was probably a first coin. I mean, Morgan coin. It was not really paper yet. So now, we're going to go from here. A lot happens in this timeline. So this could be a busy video. So 1913 and 1944. First off, let's lay out World War I. World War I is 1914 to essentially 1919, I believe. Yes. Is that right? 1718. So I'm going to go to 1919. So somewhere in here about 1917. Okay. So this is World War I, or the Great War, because they didn't know what second one was coming at the time. They didn't read the book yet. But this is the Great War starts in 1914. And this is when Europe goes off of the gold standard officially. France, Germany, England, they all go off the gold standard officially. And they start printing lots of currency so they can fund their war efforts. And now the powers that be want the U.S. in here. They've established the central bank for the third central bank, with no expiration date, no expiry. The first two had a 20-year charter. This has no expiration. The Federal Reserve can last forever, and it feels like it has. So we've been under it for 110 years. Ugly. But they want the U.S. in Civil War. They want the U.S. in World War I. So the U.S. gets pulled in 1917 through a rant, like the Archduke of Ferdinand assassination, which you may remember from a history book or a quiz at some point in high school. It's weird stuff. It doesn't seem right to me, but that was the event that they said, hey, we got to get into World War I. They pulled the U.S. into World War I, and the U.S. was not in World War I for very long, because I think it ended in 1918. But what happened was the U.S., a lot of the soldiers came back from World War I, and they brought back with them, allegedly, Spanish flu. Now the Spanish flu was 1917 and 1919. So that's Spanish flu. Now, it depends on who you ask, but that was very similar to what happened in 2020 to 2022-3 in there with a global disease, okay? There are people that were, no, historically speaking, this is all accurate. What I'm about to tell you is very accurate. So what happened, the parallels are very true. Again, this is why you need to study history, because sometimes it may not exactly repeat itself, but it does tend to rhyme. So what happened was people were wearing lots of masks. People were getting shots, especially soldiers, and people were acting that they're having adverse reactions to the shot. So people were getting sick. So lots of people were wearing masks. Lots of people were scared. And then I think it was 1919 when there was a big boxing match in San Francisco area. Interesting location. And all the powers that be, all the governors and all the high ups that attended wanted to be at this big marquee event. This is before Vegas. So it's a big event here. So big boxing match. I don't know who was involved. I don't remember the fight, but I do know there were cameramen there taking photographs of these leaders without a mask. And when that got published, people were not happy. They started to say, hey, why did that happen? Sound familiar yet? So that's what happened. Okay. So that's what happened. And it was a big event. So World War I happened. A lot of the banks went bankrupt or on the verge of collapse in Europe. So that led to the Weimar Republic in the 20s. which you've probably heard about. That's, that led to the rise of like other political parties that led to World War II. That's where the Nazis got involved, and Hitler became the power because it was it was ugly. Like Weimar Republic, this is the wheelbarrows full. I can't really show it, but wheelbarrows full of money that you ran to the store with to try and buy something that was worth something, because these pieces of paper weren't worth anything. Hyperinflation was happening. So hyperinflation is happening all over the place in Europe. In the United States, what's happening is this. The U.S. is having, from 1920 to 29, that's the roaring 20s, okay? The U.S. is having a grand old time. So what happened was the U.S. got involved in World War I, yes, but they were only involved for like a year or so. And then they got out. Their finances are still in great shape. They're producing like they're nobly from 1922 to 1929, their GDP, the GNP went up 40%. The wealth went up. The wealth in the United States doubled in that decade from 20 to 29. So they are having a fantastic time. And there's lots of different things going on. There's the roaring 20s. There are flappers. There are women that suffrage happened. Prohibition came and went in that time frame. I think that was, prohibition started in 1919, enacted in 1920. Women's suffrage was in 1920. I don't remember the year that prohibition got repealed. I think it was 22 or 23. But essentially, like the whole decade was just full of, we're doing great. We can spend whatever we want. Greatness, greatness, greatness. And then because they spent money like there was no tomorrow, currency, they got into trouble. And that's where 1929, the stock market crashed. But there was already ugliness happening. There were like the top 1% again had nearly 24% of the income by 1929. So they're the haves and the have-nots. There was a lot of disparity on who was gaining the wealth over that time, even though everybody was doing allegedly great. And everybody was doing great, but some were doing way better than others, like the Rockefellers and all those kinds of names were doing fantastic. So during that time in the 20s, right, the global currency standard is still the British pound, okay? So I'm not good at drawing the pound. I think you kind of draw it like a curly 2, or like that. That's basically, that's my best pound. So that the pound is still the global currency, even though they went off the gold standard. It's still, the pound is the leader. Now, this is where the history of the money gets involved, and it gets very interesting. In 1922, which is right here, so I'm going to draw it down here. So 1922, in a meeting in Genoa, Italy, there's a conference of Genoa. What happens there is that created the U.S., Britain, like they were both now deemed as the global standard. They didn't want to. They don't want to give up this. They don't want the pound die yet. They don't want to say that that's dead. The pound is still the top dog on the financial world. But as we head over here to Genoa, like we've gone, the pound's going off the gold standard because of World War I, and the dollar was just born. But the U.S. is doing great. England and Europe, not so much. So in 1922, they made a conference in Genoa, and what they called it was, they called it, I'm trying to remember, it was the gold exchange standard. So that's what they did, and that lasted from 1922 until 1931. So that's going to be right here, 1931. And that is the gold exchange standard. Now, this is kind of a romanticized answer of what was going on in the world. At global currencies, remember before this, global currencies were global currencies because the dominant power of the world was trading with everybody. That's how that currency got to be. That's where you had Spain and the Dutch and the Portuguese pushing all of their currencies because they were buying things from all over the planet because they were sailing everywhere. Now, this is the first standard that's been tried to adopt it around the world, and they were going to settle everything with the Bank of International Settlements, which actually was born. I know I had that on there too. I think that was launched 19. Yeah, the Bank of International Standard was born in this period as well. So again, they're trying to standardize, they're trying to gain control, but they're also saying they're hedging their bets. Like, let's try and keep this pound going as long as we can, but we got this dollar to deal with too. So now we got both. So 1922, we say, hey, both of them are the world standard. You can use either one. That's great. In 1925, I think Britain gave up, and then in 1931, it just became the dollar until it unofficially became the dollar until Bretton Woods in 1944. So in Bretton Woods in 1944, the U.S. That's the end of World War II. So World War I happens in 1941 for the U.S. That's Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, a date that will live in infamy. That's when the U.S. got pulled in, which some think that's a false flag. But regardless, the U.S. enters World War II here. All right, so this is World War II for the U.S., but the World War II was happening way earlier for Europe, with Germany invading Poland and Austria and other countries in the 30s. So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in Europe. And that's why the Britons said, no, we can't handle this. And the U.S. is still cranking. They're cranking. They're making stuff. Now, other things are happening. And I want to try and wrap this up before we get too long. So the other thing that happened here, one more thing I wanted to mention is that the U.S. goes off the gold standard at this point. And that happened in 1933 with it was called the banking. It was the Emergency Banking Act of 1933. So in 1933, right here, right, the U.S. is still they're the top dog because the British pound dropped out. The Bank of England said we can't handle this anymore. You guys go be the world standard unofficially. So what happens in 1933 is that FDR is the president, and they're about to have a banking crisis. They had the stock market crash in 1929. Right, that's up here. So they were in a depression in the United States. So that was because the 20s were roaring. Easy for me to say. It was a roaring 20s. It basically culminated with the stock market crash in 1929. It was really getting worse before that point, but it was getting there. And then in 1933, FDR made it illegal for the common person to own gold, and that's where the confiscation went. So they basically said, like, okay, gold is valued at $14 an ounce. We will pay you $21 in exchange for taking all of your gold. And most people had it in safety deposit boxes in banks, so it was easy for the U.S. to confiscate. Now, if you had it privately, if you had it under your pillow or buried in your backyard, probably fine, right? And not every type of gold was confiscated. The ones that were collectibles were not, but just an ounce of gold was confiscated. And at that point, no one knew how much the U.S. had for gold. Like, they had a bunch of it, but they didn't know. You could not audit it anymore. You could not redeem it. You can still redeem the dollar for gold, allegedly, but they're confiscating the gold. So now the U.S. is essentially going off the gold standard 1933, even though they're the gold standard. Then they revalue gold to $35 in 1934. So the government just made money on the money that they just made value on the value that they gave to the average person. So the average Joe went from $14 for the ounce of gold to $21. Great. But now the U.S. went from 21 to 35. And then that was cemented at Bretton Woods after World War II ended, or near the end. I mean, 45 was technically the end, but there was a conference in New England called Bretton Woods. That's the location. I think it was New Hampshire. Might have been Vermont. I get them mixed up. I'm sorry. But New England, they had a meeting at Bretton Woods, and the U.S. became the gold standard. And that was the standard currency for the rest of the planet, because the U.S. had most of the gold and most of the production, had most of the army too. They had everything going for them at that point in time. So I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to wrap this up from 1944, probably to modern day, in one more video. But I would love to, please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Watch all the videos. I read every comment. Looking forward to them all. But with all that said, I'm going to pause there, and I'll see you in the next video.